Welcome back, everyone, to episode 2 of our look at the story of Genghis Khan. I believe there are 6 episodes to this series, so there's a lot still to cover. Very pleased with the response yesterday. I never know when I pick a topic what you guys are going to think, how much interest there will be, whether they'll get a lot of views. And one thing I do know for sure is U.S. presidential history always does really well. That's why I go back to that one a lot. But I like to get out of my comfort zone and learn something new. And you guys seem to be responding very positively to that. And I want to thank all of you who know way more about this topic than I do for your information and your additions to our conversation. Let's keep that going. I invite every person who watches to leave a comment and let me know either something you learned you did not know, or add something to the conversation to teach the rest of us so we can all learn history together. And please, while you're at it, hit that like button. It helps a lot. It gets the word out and helps more people to see this and join our community here. So let's go ahead and dive into part 2. As always, there's a link not only to part 1 of the reaction if you didn't see yesterday's episode, but also to the original content. You can check them out without my commentary. Here we go.
It's a quiet morning just before dawn. In Temujin's camp, the family sleeps peacefully, thinking their troubles are behind them. They are very wrong. Even now, 300 Merkit soldiers thunder towards them on horseback, eager for a fight.
How's he gonna get out of this?
News traveled fast on the ancient steppe, and the story of Temujin's daring escape and new alliance with Kahn spread far and wide. His growing success got the attention of the Merkits, the tribe Temujin's father had kidnapped his mother from. They saw an opportunity to knock Temujin down a peg before he got too powerful. At Temujin's camp, an old woman was sleeping with her head on the ground, and suddenly she was awoken by the sound of approaching hooves. She alerted the camp. With little time to prepare for the attack, Temujin, his allies, his mother, and 5-year-old child all mounted horses and took flight.
I love how much of this story involves women in very influential and very important roles. Just things as simple as hearing the approaching soldiers and giving warning, giving a little bit of time for that to happen.
But Borte was left behind. Nobody is sure if she volunteered to stay behind, as her grandmother had, or if Temujin lost track of her in the confusion, or if he left her behind in a calculated move to give them all time to escape. But in the end, it was effective. When the Merkits found Borte, they halted their pursuit and took her captive. Temujin, for his part, fled to the mountains, lying low and following the elk trails he had known since childhood. 4 days later, he emerged, and seeing that the coast was clear, was overcome with gratitude for having survived. He vowed to always honor the mountains as the place of his deliverance. Temujin saw his survival as a sign that he was special in the eyes of the spirits, truly destined for greatness. But Temujin was devastated at having lost his wife. He had 3 options. He could return to his old camp and his pastoral life, but no matter how much he might build up and acquire for himself, there would always be the constant risk that some other enemy might come along and he would lose it all in another raid.
So it's interesting to hear how he felt like he was spared for a purpose, and that's a very common theme throughout history, depending on what a person's religious beliefs, whether it's fate or the gods or God or the Holy Spirit or whatever your belief might be, there's a common theme of having that sense of a higher purpose and believing that you were spared for some important reason. So it's interesting to see him kind of balance that sense of purpose and calling in his life with the cautiousness that he's showing in these situations. Some people have that same attitude of being called, and it causes them to be reckless because they're like, well, God will protect me no matter what because I'm called to this, and they just kind of very recklessly go out there. But he seems to be more tempered, more even-keeled. And it's interesting because I guess not knowing a lot about Genghis Khan going into this series, I guess my picture of him was always more of the warrior, the brash kind of just go out there and, the George Custer type spirit. But it seems so far that it's very, very different than that.
He could head north toward the wooded, isolated lands of his childhood, but those desolate lands lacked pasture for animals. Living there would require his family to scrape by as he had in childhood, fishing and trapping and catching birds. It would be a safe life, but neither prosperous nor honorable. The third option was to follow the river south to seek the help of his patron, Kahn. Though Temujin had declined the offer to take a position under Khan's authority a year ago, now that his newly built life was shattered, it seemed the only way to recover his bride. Khan was enraged that the Merkits had acted against someone under his protection, and offered Temujin 20,000 warriors to retaliate against them. He also suggested that they enlist the help of his childhood friend and blood brother, Jamuka, who had become Khan of his own tribe by this time. Jamuka had experienced his own adversities, having been captured by the Merkits and forced into slavery just as Temujin had.
Wow.
But he too had escaped. He had built his own following and was now head of his own clan.
So a couple quick things here. Number one of the things I really like that Extra History does is they are mindful when doing their animation to keep things understandable. So, always having the little name buttons that have the initials so you know who you're talking about, but also just things like differentiating in the color of the huts and things like that between different Khans and what they have. So I just like those little things, but also nobody gets to the top by themselves. We always have people who help us along the way. When I was a kind of one of many guests that were a little part of the video that my friend Matt Beat did recently, Mr. Beat, on being self-made. That was one of the things I mentioned. Nobody's an island. We all get help from somebody. But some people can get all the help in the world and just they're not built to rise to the top. You need a combination of opportunity and people who help you, but also your own attitude, your own fighting spirit. And Genghis Khan has that. He's got benefactors, he's got friends, he's got allies, but he's also got that spirit that drives him.
He was eager for a chance to take revenge on the Merkits and to help his blood brother, providing another 2 cavalry divisions to Temujin's force. They sent messengers back and forth across the steppe, arranging where and when to meet. Jamuka arrived at the appointed time and place, but Temujin and Khan's forces took their time, meeting up along the way before proceeding to the rendezvous. When they finally arrived, Jamuka was livid. He had 6,000 men under his command, each with 2 or 3 spare horses. The army's 15,000-odd horses alone were grazing 5,000 acres of grass per day, to say nothing of the horses of the families already living in the valley.
So this gives you a sense of why they were nomadic, why they had to move. When you are feeding on 5,000 acres a day, that's a lot of land, and you very quickly have to move. It's very difficult to have a large force that you can keep operating. You also got to feed the people that are riding those horses. And why do they have multiple horses? So they can ride further during the day, right? So you can go so far on one horse until it gets tired from carrying you and your equipment. Then you get on another one. So it extends your range to be able to have those multiple horses per man. But it also extends the amount of land you take up in grazing.
All of his soldiers were geared up for battle, sleeping in the rough, and eating through their limited food supplies, and increasingly anxious to get back to their families. And moreover, such an enormous force of men and horses were not exactly inconspicuous. Any wandering Merkit might have seen what was going down and galloped off to warn the others. Jamuka scolded Khan and Temujin, who were like, yeah, fair enough, our bad. The combined armies made their way north to the Merkit camp, but this was the beginning of a rift between Temujin and Jamuka that would only continue to grow. The Merkits lay in wait across a river. Each soldier built a float of reeds and swam across with a horse. The operation was too large to be a total surprise, but as soon as the Merkits realized what was happening, they panicked and scattered. Temujin frantically searched the camp for his wife, calling out her name. Now, Borte didn't realize that it was Temujin himself coming to rescue her. Any number of raiders or rivals might have been attacking, and she was not up for being captured again, so she was fleeing with the rest of the war prisoners. But when she heard Temujin's voice over the fray, she recognized it and sprinted through the battle towards him.
Wow.
As she ran to his horse and snatched the reins from his hands, he almost attacked her, thinking she was an enemy. But as soon as he recognized her, he called off the attack, dismounted in the middle of battle, and embraced her. It was a resounding victory.
Again, man, how much of this is about a love story, right? It started out with the story of his mom and how she was taken off, and now we've got battle happening just so he can rescue his wife. In some cultures, I'm not saying many or that it was common, in some cultures they might have said, it's a woman, no big deal, and moved on with their lives and just let it happen. But this guy goes to war basically to get his wife back, and boy, that says a lot.
The Merkits were scattered, both Temujin and Jamika had their revenge, and Temujin was quickly establishing himself among the Mongols as a leader. But their joy was short-lived. It was discovered that Borte had been raped by her captors and come back pregnant. 9 months after she had been rescued, she gave birth to a son. Temujin claimed that the boy was his, but because his paternity was never clearly established, the child would never be fully accepted as Temujin's heir. With the Merkits dealt with, Temujin and Jamika's families combined their camps and lived together. At least for a time, the two men were inseparable, riding, hunting, eating, even camping together. They swore their friendship for the third time, now as adults, in a public ceremony with their combined followers as witnesses. Standing before a tree at the edge of a cliff, they exchanged golden sashes, key symbols of a Mongol man's identity, as
Makes me nervous that he said at least for a time. It makes me feel like this is going to go south at some point, that one of these guys or both is going to decide that they want more influence and they want more power than they have, and that the other one, it's going to have to come at the other one's expense.
as well as horses that they had looted from the Merkits. And because of his blood brotherhood with Jamika, Temujin enjoyed an elevated status within the tribe. For a year and a half, things seemed ideal. But time has a way of changing things. Both Temujin and Jamika were powerful men with aspirations to unite and lead the Mongol tribes. Jamika supported traditional Mongolian aristocracy, where Temujin believed in a meritocratic method, and as such attracted a broader range and lower class of followers.
So it's interesting to see this happening, and this is over 800 years ago now. This is a struggle that will exist in countries and cultures all over the world. The meritocracy versus aristocracy. I'm most familiar with English history, and so along comes Oliver Cromwell during the English Civil War in the 17th century, and he puts together what's called the New Model Army, which is for the first time an army that's based on who is best equipped to lead, who is a good leader rather than who has a title he inherited from his father. So interesting. I mean, now granted, there's still a lot of aristocracy involved in the British Army all the way up to nearly the present time. But, that was one of the things that the United States was trying to break free from. The idea, in fact, it was written into the Constitution that American citizens could not have titles from foreign nations. They wanted to get away from that idea that just because your father was somebody important, that you automatically become somebody important. They wanted it to be about who had the talent and the ability for a particular position or role or job. So interesting to see this happening even then.
Jamika came from a higher lineage than Temujin, and over time began to treat him less as an equal and more as a younger brother or a subordinate. Temujin had killed the last brother figure in his life who had demanded subservience, so, as you can imagine, this did not sit well, and they began to drift apart. One day, as the two men were riding together, Jamika suggested that they split up their camps, that Temujin should take the goats and the sheep and camp by the river, while Jamika took the horses and camped closer to the mountains. This was a power move. Horses were the wealth of the steppe. Horse breeders, such as those Jamika had descended from, were a noble class. Horses played such an essential role in battle and steppe life that they were a status symbol. The message behind Jamika's statement was clear. He was asserting his authority as a horse breeder and treating Temujin as a lowly shepherd. Temujin was perplexed and returned to his family, relaying the order and asking his mother what she made of it. Borte overheard.
Asking his mother. Again, I love this. I keep saying this, but this just seems really uncommon to me. I know there are certain cultures where the women have a much more prominent and important role than they do in many of the cultures of the West. But this is all new. Like, this is a revelation to me. It's something I didn't expect, so it's very cool.
Heard this and interrupted. She was angry at this betrayal and didn't trust Jamaica any longer. She insisted that they break from the group and set out on their own, along with any of Jamaica's followers who wanted to join them. They fled that very evening, riding through the night to gain as much distance as possible in case anyone decided to pursue. The following dawn, something strange happened. 3 brothers and their families, leading members of minor clans under Jamaica, caught up with them.
And see, again, you can see the color to make it really, really easy to tell what it is you're looking at. Just one of the many things I love about extra history.
Then more families from other clans caught up as well. In the end, many of Jamaica's followers chose to join Temujin. Now, they weren't the greatest of families. Jamaica still had the loyalty of the established leaders, but Temujin offered something that Jamaica could not: the prospect of advancement.
There you go. It doesn't matter what family you were born into. You have an opportunity to rise up. I think of Alexander Hamilton. I'm doing a podcast right now on Alexander Hamilton that should be out sometime next week. By the way, if you have not checked out the podcast, there's links in the description, or just look for Vlogging Through History on whatever podcast platform that you use. I've got 5 episodes up now, 2 more coming in the next week or so. Alexander Hamilton wrote about how he would say things like, man, I wish there were a war or something that would give me an opportunity to rise above my station, because the opportunities were limited if you didn't get born into the right family. So, man, you throw open the door and say, hey, it's not about your family anymore. It's not about who your father was. It's about how good can you be. Man, that's an opportunity that people are going to flock to.
At the age of 19, Temujin had taken his first great step on the road to leadership and power. The rift between Temujin and Jamaica would grow into 2 decades of warfare, as each young man rose in stature as leading Mongol warriors, accrued followers, and built up their bases of power. They would grow from sworn brothers to the bitterest of rivals, splitting the Mongols into a vicious civil war full of raids and killings. Their rift was not just personal, but also ideological. As the rightful heir to his position as Kahn and coming from a noble lineage, Jamaica was fighting to maintain tradition and aristocracy.
Status quo.
Temujin was a radical who cared more about the quality of his followers' character than their heredity. His following was a motley band of mixed class and origin. He had fought his way up from nothing, going from a ragged child hunting rats in the woods to a respected military leader. His following lacked the legitimacy of Jamaica's noble background, but it was very appealing for those who wanted to find freedom and build a better life for themselves. The fight for the future of the steppe tribes had begun.
This is fascinating because, man, there's so many parallels between this and the French Revolution, the English Civil War, the American Revolution, and so many others. The battle. I even think of Japan with, in the 19th century, where you have the kind of the downfall of the samurai and kind of a new order that's coming about. I just never realized that that's what this story was a story about status quo versus change, about aristocracy versus meritocracy. I'm excited to learn to see the next 4 episodes and see where this all goes. So join me on that journey. Use, as I mentioned before, the comment section below to let me know what you learned or add to the conversation. Please hit that like button. We'll see you again tomorrow with episode 3. Thanks for watching.